Bienvenidos, Ushamdid, and welcome Anne Arundel Community College learners from the Spring 2023 semester taking the CTS-233 Section 400 Network Programmability course. This is the Cisco Networking Academy's DEVASC 200-901 Certification Exam Preparation course. And in this part of Lab 6.2.7, where we're working on building a sample web app with a Docker container, in a Docker container, we're going to be looking at parts 3 and 4 of the lab. Now, part 3 of the lab, we're going to be able to move through very quickly because if you watched my Flask supplement on the Flask library, that was really part 3. But we'll take a look at the file because we're going to do something really exciting here with Flask. Again, I'm going to show you just how powerful Flask can be. We're actually going to create an index.html file. We're going to have a style.css or cascading style sheet file that's going to go along with it that's going to allow us to customize the look and feel of that page. And we're doing it all with the Flask Python framework. So very, very cool. So again, we're going to be extending the functionality of Flask to use actual web pages. So let's go ahead and dive in and take a look at what we're going to need to do that. So as you can see, I'm in the sample app directory here. And if I say ls, you can see we've got static, a directory named static and a directory named templates. Now in that static directory, if I say ls-l on static, you can see there's our cascading style sheets file. If I cat that file out and say static and then style.css, we can see the contents, which is literally just the single tag here, this body, changing the background to a light steel blue in our body. And then in the templates file, if we list out what's in there, ls-l on templates, there's our index.html. If I cat out what is inside that index.html, there it is. Now, I've actually included in here a little woot woot, right? So that we can see that it's actually pulling this index.html. And you can see here, we're going to have the you're calling me from. We're going to be using that request functionality from the Flask class that's going to show us the remote address. And in this case, it's simply going to be the local host address. So before we do that, though, let's clear the screen and let's take a look at the sample_app.py. So if I say sample_app.py, this should look really familiar to you. Again, this is sort of part 3 of the lab. You can see I've got part 4 commented out here and ready to go with respect to what we're going to extend the functionality to do. But as a review, real quickly, we're importing from the Flask library, the Flask class, and we're going to get all the features and functionality, and we're also going to import request, right? The features and functionality from request. Now, what does this do right here? Well, that just instantiates or creates a Flask object that initially, right, in the output is going to kick out the name of this file, right? Dunder name is the name of the file when we go to run it for the purposes of the class object instantiation, and it's going to be named sample as the variable name that captures our Flask object, or that represents our object. Then we've got the decorator. Remember, don't panic here. The decorator is just the icing on top of the function cake, meaning when we run this program and when someone accesses the root of the web server, which is just going to simply be localhost : and the port we're running on, which is 8080. We'll see that down here. That it runs this function. That's all the decorator does. The decorator is going to say, hey, if someone's going to the root of the web server, the main page, then I'm going to run this function right here. These are inextricably linked together. The decorator and this function that it immediately precedes, right? And so initially we're calling from the IP address and we're just using the request.remote address. However, we're now going to use this render template when we extend the functionality so that it's actually rendering an index.html. And so then if I wanted to render other web pages, I could simply put the /about and then have it render about.html, the /books and have it render the books.html page. And so you can kind of see here how you can actually kind of build a little development website. Again, this is not for production, but you could develop a little development website with multiple pages that are going to get referenced. So last thing here, we've got this sample.run. Again, that's the name of our Flask object is sample, and run is the method that we're calling here that's inextricably linked to the sample class, right? This object that's a Flask, I should say sample object, not sample class. Sample object that's linked to the Flask class, and it's going to run, it's going to bind itself to all ports that are on this host, right? And we're going to run it on port 8080. So let's go ahead and run this, right? We would say Python 3. So we'll say Python 3 and then sample underscore app.py. Now you can see we get the log. It's going to tell us, hey, we're running on port 8080. Control C to quit. So if I come up here, we kick open a new tab using my Chromium web browser, and I say, oops, sorry, localhost, and yeah, there it is. 8080 is already here because we messed around with this before. And you can see it says, hey, I'm calling from 127.0.0.1, which is the loopback address here on the Linux box. And as you can see here also, we have a little log. Now, how do I quit out? I just simply do Control C. If I was to go back to the Chromium web browser right now and refresh, yeah, it's not running anymore. So let's tackle part 4 here of this lab. And remember, all we're really doing is adding those 2 lines. So if I was to VI that file one more time, and what did I cat it out the first time, didn't I? All right, so let's clear the screen. I'm going to go in here to update sample app.py, and now we're going to uncomment out that line because we want this line in here to render template. Everything else stays the same except for right here. I don't need that line anymore. I just need to render the index.html. Now remember, the index.html has all of the code in it, and let's take a look at it one last time. If I cat out templates index.html, it has all of the code in here that's going to link the style sheet and where that style sheet is located, and it's going to have the request.remote address call in here. This is why I don't need that line in the Python module that is going to call this. We call the index.html, and the fact that Flask is rendering the index.html, Flask knows that, hey, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pump out this request.remote address, and I'm just going to show it on that on the index.html page. So let's save this file. And oops, sorry, we're going to go ahead and clear the screen, and let's go ahead and run it now with these changes in there. So Python 3 sample underscore app.py, and you can see here, right, there's that dunder name for the kicking off of the serving Flask app sample underscore app. And then we've got the fact that it's bound to all interfaces, and we're running on port 8080. So now when we pull up our Chromium web browser and I click refresh, there it is. We've got the steel blue background. We've got the woot woot, and you are calling me from the remote address, the 127.0.0.1. Now, if you had a much larger setup here where you were allowing this to be accessed via the internet, it should say what address that person is calling from. Again, we're just doing it here on the local host. So again, what were the 2 changes we made to the file? In fact, I can actually step over here and let's go back into the sample app directory. We'll click clear. And if I was to say cat sample underscore app.py, so what were the changes that we made? So we commented out that line. We don't need to do this inside of the Python module anymore because we are doing it when we render that HTML, that index.html. And so that is all that is part of part 4 of this lab. And as you can see, start to think about how could I extend the features and functionality here. Maybe I can put in the about.html page or the books.html page that just lists all my books. So again, Flask is extremely flexible. All right, well, that is going to do it for part 3 and 4 of Lab 6.2.7. We now have the Python file that we need. And so part 5 that we're going to be looking at next, right, starting to get a little bit exciting here. We've got this application we've created to do the sample web app. Now we're going to build a bash script that is going to create and run a Docker container for us with this application, this Python application, or I should say the Flask application that we created with Python. All right, thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I hope to see you in the next video.